Yes, let me turn your volume up a bit.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alondra Moctezuma, First Speech Democracy Mock Court Petitioners. And I will begin, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
May I please court, Your Honor? I, Alondra Moctezuma, and my partner, Jacob Shaw, will represent the petitioner in this case today, and I will address the fact that the United States of America was never established to be a democracy, while my partner, Jacob Shaw, will address the faith the government has kept this fact from the public, which has led to a great deal of misunderstanding. I will speak for 12 minutes, and my partner will speak for 13 minutes. We will reserve the remaining 5 minutes for rebuttal. My speech is on point of error 1. The United States was never established to be a democracy. Your Honor, we request that you rule that the United States was never established to be a democracy for the following reasons. First, the United States is indeed a republic, not a democracy. Accurately defined, a democracy is a form of government in which the people decide policy matters directly throughout town hall meetings by voting on ballot initiatives and referendums. A republic, on the other hand, is a system in which the people choose representatives who in turn make a policy decision on their behalf. By applying the writings of James Madison in the Federalist Number 10, we see that the framers of the Constitution were altogether fearful of pure democracy. Everything they read and studied taught them that pure democracies have ever been spectacles, and turbulence and contention have ever been found incompatible with personal security or rights of property, and have in general have been short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Second, the framers of the U.S. Constitution established in their Constitution two very non-democratic and highly representative safeguards in the 1787 document. There was the election of the Senate to be selected by the state legislators of the state. It was not by the direct vote of the people. This remained in the Constitution until 17th Amendment was ratified on May 31st, 1913. The Senate, which made up one half of the U.S. Congress, was not elected directly by the people. This is an obviously and indisputable reason to vote to the United States was not established to be a democracy. The other original concept that we're not a democracy and we're not established to be one, all one has to do is look at how we elect our president. Instead of directly voting for a president or a vice president, we vote for a slate of electors who carries out a particular state with the majority of votes will send their electors to the Electoral College, and those electors will officially vote for the president of the United States. Both of these voting practices called for undemocratic practices. Third, riddance of the merits of a republic and representative form of government. James Madison in the Federalist 10 observed that one of the most important differences between a democracy and a republic is the delegation of the government in a republic to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. The primary effect of such a scheme, Madison continued, was to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them throughout the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary and partial considerations. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that a public voice pronounced by the representatives or the people will be consonant to the public good that if pronounced by the people themselves convene from the same purpose. Written in the Federalist Paper 64, Madison added that there are particular moments in public affairs when the people, stimulated by some irregular passion or some illicit advantage, or misled the artful misrepresentation of interest men, may call for measures which they themselves will afterwards be most ready to lament and condemn. In these critical moments, how salutary will the interference of some temperate of respect body of citizens in order to check the misguided career and suspend the blow meditated by the people against themselves, until reason, justice, and truth can regain the authority over the public mind. Clearly, Madison was talking about the importance of refining and enlarging the public view throughout the scheme of representation. Fourth, the U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 4 states, the United States shall guarantee every state in the Union a republic form of government. If the U.S. were a democracy, why would we guarantee that each state would be a republic? And if U.S. were a democracy, why even have states anyways? Cross-apply the fact that state governments even exist supports our case because in a true democracy, you cannot have a state of layer of government. It would work more smoothly and more efficiently to have just a federal layer of government. Fifth, there is a matter of 3/5 compromise. This was an agreement between the southern and the northern states reached during the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia, during which the basic framework of the United States was established. Under this compromise, only 3/5 of the slave population was counted for the purpose of taxation and representation in Congress. Counting slaves as part of a population rather than a property would give southern states more political clout. If we're a true democracy, we would not have needed a 3/5 compromise at all because all people would have been created equally and given equal rights. You cannot have equal rights when one group has no rights at all and are counted 3/5 of a person from the purpose of census. As all compromise do, the 3/5 compromise started as a dispute. Most of the northern states didn't want to count slaves at all, arguing that they should be treated as property. Since they didn't have votes or any other power, the southern states, however, wanted to count slaves as people so that they would get more representation in Congress, solidifying their political power. The North resisted this, fearing that counting slaves in this way would increase the congressional seats apportioned to the South, thereby making the South extremely formidable. In the end, two representatives, James Wilson and Roger Sherman, came up with the 3/5 compromise, which was designed to meet the demands of both sides. Recognizing the desire of the Southern, wanted to reach out to the Southern states to encourage them to ratify. The 3/5 compromise allowed the government to count part of the slave population while allaying the fears of the North about Southern power. Of course, many people in the northern states kept slaves as well. But the vast majority of slaves in America at the time were working on southern plantations and agricultural labors. Under the 3/5 compromise, plantation owner in the southern gained considerable political power, which they used to promote their own political agenda and desire. The language of Constitution avoided to using the term slaves, with the relevant taxing shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to serve terms of years, and excluding Indians not taxed. 3/5 of all the persons. Some people have suggested that all other persons language indicated that the framers of the Constitution opposed slavery and that they wished to establish a document which would be flexible in the event and slavery was abolished. It is more likely, however, that language was designed to wiggle room so the others' addition to slaves could be counted under this definition. Given that slavery was a widespread and commonly accepted by the founders, but the idea that all men were not created equally and certain men had rights to own others as well, as the other men who were owned were not worth being counted as a whole human person, is not only undemocratic, it is morally wrong. 6. The founding fathers rejected democracy. Why? It's actually very simple. Because it is inherently flawed with share of wealthy philosophy, which only works as long as there is someone else's money to share. Those receiving are quite pleased with getting something from nothing, but those forced to give are denied the rights to spend the benefits of their own labor in their own self-defense interests, which creates jobs no matter how the money is spent. They also lose a portion of incentive to produce. Benjamin Franklin once defined democracy as two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch, and defined liberty as a well-armed lamb contesting the vote on what to have for lunch. Fraser Tyler, author of Decline and Fall of the Athenian Republic, authored more than 200 years ago, said it best. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until voters discover that they can vote themselves largest from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the best benefits from the public treasury, with the results that a democracy always collapsed over a fiscal policy always follows a dictatorship. Where does the money come from all the good that government does? The answer is out of every someone else's pocket. If it is with this consent, it is a form of charity. If force, a form of trinity. The more and longer given, the more entitled the receiver becomes until he is quite willing to take to the streets and demand more of other people's money, fully satisfied that he has every right to. This works until those who have money are destroyed as a class, and everyone is equally poor. The result is diminished standard of living for everyone, as was the case under 20th century communists. Cross-apply the fact that this is much easier and better to people to provide themselves before waiting on the government to help them out. To further give an example of this, let me give you a scenario. If you were laying on the floor having a heart attack, would you like the person who found you there do which of the two following? Call the police for help, or would you like them call their local Congress, call their local senator, call the president of the United States, or seek immediate medical attention. Obviously, the larger the government and its illicit hands reaching deep in the pockets are clearly impact in the U.S. equally, and are clearly the founding fathers were very much against the democracy for that reason. Seventh, a democracy gives us the principle of majority rules in frequent elections with options, but little more. Actually, considered, a democracy has a great deal more or less than a republic. It does not protect us from the government redistribution of wealth philosophy, which entitles the less productive to get something for nothing. A republic includes a frequent election with options. It also gives a place of majority rules, but only to a point. For as your mother told you when growing up, the majority is not always right. A republic is also based upon natural and unalienable rights that come from a source higher than man. For example, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Minority rights are protected by a majority in a republic. A lynch mob is democracy. Everyone voted but the man being lynched. A republic rescues this man, gives him a fair trial with bona fide judge and a witness for his defense. In a republic, there is an emphasis on individual differences rather than an absolute equality such as individual differences, and are seen as a strength in a republic rather than a flaw under democracy, which equates sameness as equality. Limited government is also a major aspect of republic. A democracy government is just the opposite. In a republic, the government is handcuffed from dominating our lives. This is a list of functions and a clear process of obtaining additional power. Finally, there is a healthy fear of emotion in masses, destabilizing natural law upon which real freedom is based. The founding fathers created a republic, not a democracy. The Constitution, as designed, is the mechanism to ensure we stay a republic. We must demand our leaders a strict adherence to the document in order to preserve liberty and that of future generations. Eighth, when asked Benjamin Franklin was asked by a woman what form of new government would take place, Franklin asked shrewdly, a republic, if you can keep it. Today, Franklin's words, especially prophetic, where he realized that a vigilant populace was necessary to preserve liberty and rich boundaries of the Constitution. According to Franklin, this experience was dependent on maintaining an axioms decided upon those summer days. With such an activism, the Constitution would read only as a dead letter. Those who claim the Constitution provided a democracy as a cornerstone of political system is historically mistaken. A democracy is assurance of mob rule, where majority factions lose their liberty throughout legislation, and when power is consolidated over the subdued masses. This arrangement was intentionally dismissed during the time of ratification. James Madison specially addressed the issue, the Federalist Number 10. From this view of subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by I mean a society, is consisted of a small number of citizens who assembled and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure of mischief of faction. A common passion of interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication of concern results from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or any obnoxious individual. Hence, it's the most democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. 9. Later in the same essay, Madison illustrated an alternative, the same advantage which a republic has over democracy in controlling the effect of faction is enjoyed by a large over a small republic. It is enjoyed by the union over the states compromising it. A republic, according to Madison, promised the cure of which we are seeking. Then, serving as James Madison co-adjutor, John Jay noted the pure democracy, like pure rum, easily produced intoxication, and which in thousands mad pranks and fooleries in the Philadelphia Convention, and Randolph said, in tracing these evils to their original origin, every man had found it in the turbulence and follies of democracy. Alexander Hamilton, the organizer of the Federalist Essay, said the following of democracy at New York's ratifying convention in 1788. It has been observed that a pure democracy, if it were practical, would be will be the most perfect government. Experience has proven that no position is more false than this. The ancient democracies in which the people themselves deliberated never possessed one good feature of government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure deformity. In opposing democracy, a republic ensured that minority rights are protected. Individuals embody the smallest minority on earth and are not exceptions to the creed. The individuals was supposed to be superior to the collective. Individual rights are recognized and collective rights were not. Franklin wisely understood that the value of liberty necessitated a republic form of government. I sometimes run into people that have been disfranchised with the constitutional system. They counted the Constitution ineffectual and completely unsuccessful, often basing their claims in a propensity of government to violate its restrictions. While their claims find merit, their individuals often fail to identify a key platitude that explains the federal government has degenerated throughout the last 2 centuries. The Constitution doesn't enforce itself, and Franklin replies proves that he was nearly aware of this fact. Instead, it takes the dedication of individuals and localities acting as agitators to hold federal officials accountable. The founders realized the document does not protrude fangs or grow a scorpion's tails to bite or sting a violating offender. Instead, it requires the action of individuals to reject this tendency. It often requires great loss in property, fortune, and reputation to do so. Constitutions are no more supernatural than a paper that are written on. Considering this, what if Patrick Henry was right in objecting the Constitution? What if George Mason currently noted that the government which would rise in the plaster of its mold will be repugnant? What if Robert Yates and John Lansing astutely realized that WS representatives were plotting to overpower the states throughout a nation takeover? Yet nothing lives in a vacuum, and many forces have tried to change the way we think of the founding fathers and the document that guide this great nation. One thing that has remained constant: the U.S. Constitution was written to provide our nation a republic, not a democracy. Cross-apply my arguments, and we pray that you vote for the petitioner in this matter.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Can I ask you a few questions? Don't go.
Yes.
Okay, I want to get your personal feelings. When you started, you sounded like this is not a democracy, and that's awful. But when you finished, you said this is not a democracy, and I'm glad. So what is your personal feeling? Are you glad this is not a democracy?
Yeah. My personal feeling, I think that I'm actually glad that it's not a democracy. I wouldn't want people ruling and having their say-so, because we would have plenty of legal things. We would have many unright things. And I feel like we have the authority. There's people above us telling us our laws, and maybe if we were in a classroom and they decide hey, whoever doesn't want to be in school, y'all don't have to be in school. And the majority of students would not be in school learning for their education. And I feel like that's good that the law is enforcing us to go to school, because we're learning and we have to learn. And
okay, but that's great. Good. Now I just want to kind of test out a couple ideas on you.
okay.
That was a good answer. So my next question is, well, what are you going to do about the situation where women did not get a chance to vote until 1921? I mean, if you're one of those Republic people, let's stick with the Constitution. Well, how do you feel about the fact that women didn't have a right to vote from 1777 to 1921? You're a woman.
Well, you would want to educate those people so women can vote. Obviously, you don't have the right, but you want to teach those people that have the right to tell you, hey, you can vote, women can vote. You want to educate them.
What if your Republican people said, no, women are second-class citizens and they should never be allowed to vote. They should stay home and raise children. That's what many countries in the world do. The world is governed by males, and women should not be allowed to drive, like in Saudi Arabia, or vote like in the early parts of the United States. And that's what we Republican folks here, us experts, believe is the right course for society. How do you feel about that?
Working in through the system. The people that are the people that are making the laws are visualizing the people. They're obviously making it better for the people, but they're the ones wanting the people to be best.
Okay, so you don't mind that you don't have the right to vote. Somebody else will take your interests into account. That's your point of view? Yes or no?
You don't get the right to vote unless you have the law behind you.
Well, I mean, they write these laws. They change these laws. I mean, we had a civil war, and blacks did not vote until about the 1960s in the South. Mm-hmm. They had you've got to be able to read. You've got to know all 27 judges in the county before we're allowing you to vote. And so after President Kennedy took over, we passed a voting rights law that allowed people who are black to vote in the South, and then they've had their first black mayor. You seem to be against that.
Oh, but Nuremberg laws in Germany, laws in Germany prove my point. Sorry.
Which laws in Germany? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What proves your point?
Nuremberg laws in Germany.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm done. Thank you very much. You did a great job, Alondra. I got no audio here. Hold on. Can we get the audio? I lost it. There we go. I hear you.
So, hello, Mr. Kroth. Ready for me to begin with the second speech?
What's your name?
My name is Jacob Shaw.
I remember you.
Yes, you judged me a couple of times now.
Yeah, you're going to be a senator.
Hopefully so one day.
Go ahead.
May it please the court, I'll be speaking for the remaining 13 minutes. Please trust upon my partner Alondra's first speech, and I'd like to address the second point of error, which is as follows. That the government has kept this fact from the public, which has led a great deal of misunderstanding. Your Honor, this point of error is predicated on two factors. One is that a small group of people inside the government or out of the government can easily manipulate the general public and they believe in almost anything. And second, is that it can be accomplished without the general public finding out what has happened. To prove these subpoints, I'll show Your Honor the when, who, what, why, and how this change all took place. After I present this evidence, I pray that you find and vote for the plaintiffs in this case. First, the when. As shown in our first speech, the United States of America was established as a republic. How about the haunting words of Ben Franklin when he said, "A republic, if you can keep it," to one who asked what the founders had made for us. A republic, if you can keep it. Keep what we did from 1788 to 1912, the United States remained pretty much the same. Although there were good and bad times, the power of the government rested clearly in what anyone would consider a republic format. The balance of power between the branches was intact, and the ability of influence by small groups of super wealthy people was greatly minimized because of the checks and balances and decentralized form of government. For this to change, and allow the super wealthy to take over with their influence, they would have to create the illusion of democracy, or really what they wanted, a large-scale change in our political system, making the central government the most powerful. This rationale was simple. It was for control. It was easier to control with a small group of people, one or two things, than 48 or 50 things. Centralization was created for command and control, not democracy. In Wilson's first term, 1913 to 1917, to tilt the country in the direct election of senators, the slogan, "He kept us out of war," the ability of the federal government to issue an income tax, and Federal Reserve Bank. The American people bought all of this without a great deal of concern put it into our Constitution or our republic. After all, the way they were sold to the American public was that there was democratic things which would bring more freedom to the individual citizen. Without thinking, people quickly brought to the simplistic mindset and took these people on their word, never doubting them. The income tax in 1913 was never going to be higher than half of 1%, and you only paid it over money made for that year. That was more than $5,000. Fully 97% of the people would never have to pay tax and was sold as something the common man would like, because we get the rich to pay their fair share. People believed what was said. The truth, however, was much different. Taxes were raised early and often. What was supposed to be a soak the rich scheme had become just the opposite. Are you surprised? The direct election of senators was supposed to be a good thing. Now all 48 states at that time would elect their senators by direct vote instead of going to their state legislatures. The real problem here, instead of helping the common man with a great ability to vote, it did the exact opposite. Rich and powerful people can, through targeted campaign, help act much more easily this way by having to go through each state capital. The decentralization is offered the illusion of that, but it guaranteed that the power shift would be nothing more than an illusion of democracy. It was like the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were without corresponding legislation to protect the people. In 1913, the United Security or Federal Reserve System. This was a system that was both private and public that would control the money plus the money supply in the United States. A Federal Reserve System might have been needed, but not a system set up by the bankers, run by the bankers, and for the benefit of the bankers. Too big to fail began in 1913, and that's the problem most Americans at the time did not see. With these three things in place, the monarchy of a large central government replaced by a republic. Now, a small group of very rich people could easily run the country to their benefit. To keep the president in power, the powers would be turned to slogans until the president as the person who kept us out of war. In a very close election for Charles Evan Hughes, who later became the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Wilson barely won. The election was created with stability to keep us out of war. However, after the election, the U.S. got into World War I, 1 month after Wilson was sworn in for a second term, and 5 months after he won the second election. The Who. For it to be a crime or change, you must have changed agent or person doing it. Overall, President Wilson was the president. He, however, was being used or was just playing a part. His main ability was to active part of president and allow things to happen. The real changeman, besides people who were calling the shots behind the scenes, was one Edward Bernays, a member of Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information. The committee officially began in April 1917 and ran until 1919. However, we learned it unofficially began long before the unofficial start of the task of getting the United States prepared to enter the war on the side of the Allies. Even two of the largest groups of immigrant population in the United States were Irish and Germans, specified that neither of these groups would like to support England in the war. The U.S. government started to soften up the public and to change their minds about the war. Germans became the Huns, or were vilified as the aggressors in the war. Somehow, the truth that the war was started by the Serbs and the Austro-Hungarian Empire never really saw the light of day. This is not the truth. It was what they wanted the people to believe. It was the Edward Bernays that came up with the slogan, "Make the world safe for democracy." The slogan was used to get us into World War I. On March 5th of 1917, President Wilson was officially sworn in for a second term. Less than 1 month later, on April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before a joint session of Congress to seek a declaration of war against Germany, and one ordered the war be made safe for democracy. He had without any major event taking place between November 1916 and April 1917. In fact, if you listen to parts of the speech, you can ascertain that very fact. 4 days later, Congress voted to declare war with 6 senators and 50 House members dissenting. Now, Wilson's speech in front of the Joint Congress on April 2nd, 1917 was such as follows. It is a fearful thing to lead this great peaceful people into war, into the most terrible and disastrous of all wars. Civilization itself seems to be in the balance. We're accepting this challenge of hostile purpose because we know that in such a government, following such methods, we can never have a friend, and in the presence of its organized power, always lying in the way to accomplish what we know not for what purpose. There can be no assured security for the democratic governments of the world. We are not about to accept the challenge of battle with this natural foe to liberty and shall, if necessary, put in the whole force of the nation to check and nullify its pretensions and its power. We are glad that we see the facts with no veil of false pretense about them, to fight this for the ultimate peace of the world and for the liberation of its peoples, German peoples included, for the rights of the nations great and small, and the privilege of men everywhere to choose their way of life and of obedience. The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundation of political liberty. We have no selfish ends to serve, because there are no conquest, no dominion. We seek no indemnities for ourselves, no material compensation for the sacrifices we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind. We shall be satisfied when those rights have been made as secure as the faith and the freedom of the nations can make them. Just because we fight without rancor and without selfish reject, taking nothing for ourselves, we shall wish to share with all free peoples. We shall, I feel confident, conduct our operations as belligerents, without passion and observe with proud punctilio the principles of right and a fair play we profess to be fighting for. And as to nothing of the governments allied with the imperial government of Germany, because they have not made war upon or challenged us to defend our right and our honor. The Austro-Hungarian government has, indeed, avowed its unqualified endorsement and acceptance of the reckless and lawless submarine warfare, and up to now without disguise by the imperial German government. And it has therefore now been possible for this government to receive Count Tenorowski, the ambassador recently accredited to this government by the imperial and royal government of Austria-Hungary. That government is not actually engaged in warfare against citizens of the United States on the seas, and I take liberty, for the present at least, of postponing a discussion of our relations with the authorities of Vienna. We went into this war only where we are clearly forced into it because there are no other means of defending our rights. Defend our rights. It's the same logic if you applied. Germans would allow them to attack U.S. ships that were carrying weapons secretly in the first place. Wilson did no more than he was told to do so. He lived without a war long enough to get us into it and to wrap everything around the concept that we were fighting for democracy. Democracy for whom, however? The millions of Negroes who enjoy little or more or none of it? Millions of women who couldn't vote, or millions of Native Americans whose land was stolen from them? How's about the fact that democracy was a selling point to war, not a reality in our government? Today, because of this one speech and this one man, millions of people across this great nation believe we live in a democracy. Nothing can be further from the truth or more illusionary. The how. The best way to explain how are through the words of Edward Bernays himself. In his book Propaganda, in 1928, Mr. Bernays explained that conscious and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is a true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which a democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they to live together as smoothly functions society. And almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, are dominated by a relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. He also added from the same book, men, or people as he was meaning, are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Continuous interpretation is achieved by trying to control every approach in the public mind in such a manner that the public receives the direct impression, often without being conscious of it. Clearly can be ascertained by his own words that Bernays did on purpose manipulate the thoughts of the American public to change his mind on World War I. By doing so, set the mark and change the American mindset of the government as well. Today, by millions of students being taught the U.S. is truly a democracy. On April 2nd, 1917, we're not a democracy, and then it was just a slogan to be used to draw support of a war. The why. Effectively, the powers to be got their war made money increase their power. Money, power, and influence. All the greedy aspects of super yet wealthy people who fought the war. It was much different. The war built up in World War I. They made the super wealthy bankers and businessmen tremendous amounts of money. Their power by 1917 was tremendous. But the illusion of democracy, we fought hard to enjoy these rights. Without realizing it, it was only more or less an illusion. There was no real democracy. There were no real changes. The poor were still poor. It was only the rich who took off to become super rich. The oddity of big government is that bigger it gets, the easier it is controlled by small and well-organized group of people. The most influential one word that was written in the 1928 book, Propaganda, was the word control. They explained how he learned to control public's intentions, beliefs, and actions through propaganda, and doing this without their knowledge. Lastly, the what. Here, the American public bought into Edward Bernays would call the illusion. Bernays explained it like this. The history of the Industrial Revolution shows how the power passed from the king and aristocracy to the bourgeoisie. Universal suffrage and universal schooling reinforced the tendency. And the last year, the bourgeoisie stood in fear of the common people, for the masses promised to become king. We didn't really say that the power never was passed to the people. It was the illusion of power. The king's spirit passed it to the aristocracy, and in turn, the aristocracy passed it to super wealthy capitalists. Instead of passing power to the common man, used this illusion to gain more strength, i.e. the IRS, Federal Reserve, private banks, controlling the US, tax codes that people do not understand. Why? Because they can, and this way they can stay invisible and control everything. This is the what? The ability to control without being noticed, and the ability to run the country without the appearance of such. Now, in conclusion, we have a grave conundrum. How could we be a democracy whenever we were one? How could we be a democracy? We not vote directly for our president, let alone any important legislation. Plain and simple, we were founded to be a republic and remained as such events until 1913. Since that time, we're still a republic, but many people have been hoodwinked into believing that we're some sort of democracy. At the beginning of my speech, I told you there were two things that have happened for people to believe that we're in democracy. One was a small group inside the government, or out of the government, had to be able to easily manipulate the general public into believing that that was the case. And the second was that can be accomplished without the general public finding out what happened. Through my subpoints, I showed you, Your Honor, the when, 1913 and onward, the who, urban days, and other since, the what, fame we live in a democracy, the why, control people and the government to do their bidding, the how, the public propaganda, news media, and social media. This change took place to illusion and to keep the same people in power. And during all of this evidence today, Your Honor, I pray that you find for the plaintiffs in this case. Thank you for your time, and I'm now open to questions if you have any for me.
Very good. Thank you, Jacob. I want to try to summarize what you say. Now, were you and Alondra on different sides of this question?
No, we use different supporting evidence for our claims that America is not a democracy.
Okay, that's okay. Got it. So now your particular take is America is not a democracy, and the whole illusion of democracy is a sham. It makes people feel like they're in control when in fact their vote really doesn't make any difference at all, and that other people, small groups, rich groups, are really controlling everything. And democracy is just a word that you sell people war and sell people a bill of goods when it's not true. That's your point of view?
Precisely, and it goes even more so with the whole propaganda aspect that Edward Bernays was implementing with his book, Propaganda 28, as well as being on Wilson's committee to get people aroused to fight in World War I, telling them making the world safe for democracy.
So it's really important for us to believe that Hillary Clinton, we're going to choose Hillary Clinton or so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so, and the power is really with us. We have all the power. We live in a democracy, when in fact that's not really the case at all.
Well, that's what President Wilson, as well as Edward Bernays, his whole committee on World War I, and implementing, try to arouse bigger for World War I, want most people to believe that we are a democracy, and therefore that should take into consideration when we're voting. But in actuality, that's not what happens. Our founders intend for us to be a democracy when electing the president, senators, things of that nature.
So in your opinion, the majority of Americans did not want us to go to the Iraq War, and yet we did. Is that an example of us not really being a democracy, and the policies and decisions of this country are in the hands of somebody else, not the American people?
Precisely. In fact, most wars the United States has been involved in, the American people have been vehemently against going into.
Good man. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we have some questions for you, Dr. Kroth, because we don't have the other groups. So we're going to introduce you to another person, and Jacob and Alondra, and then they're going to ask you guys some questions, okay?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you were here.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Pamela, and this is Jacob and Alondra. And often students get second-hand information, and in an attempt to learn more, they are often interested in what we want to learn about this topic. So we have a few questions for you.
Yes.
Okay. So why did our forefathers worry so much about a democracy?
Say it again.
Why did our forefathers worry so much about having a democracy?
Well, I think they were afraid of mob rule, just the way Alondra said. And they felt that the lynch mob psychology of mob rule, everybody would say, oh, give us a tax cut. Do you remember Proposition 13 in California? Well, they kept raising people's property taxes, raising and raising. And then all of a sudden the people had a proposition where they could vote what's called participatory democracy. And they voted to lower their taxes. It was the most controversial thing ever done in California. So Alondra's right. We voted to put money in our pockets. But I think that those fears of Madison were overwrought. There are many examples where the majority of people voted for their public interest against their own personal interest. That would be an interesting term paper to write, but there are many examples when people actually voted for higher taxes because they felt they needed it for their community. They are called bond initiatives. People go all the time and they say, we're going to vote to tax ourselves more to support our schools. So I think Madison was wrong on that. Democracy does work. Thanks for the question. That's a long-winded answer. What's your next?
Go ahead. Number 2.
Okay. So why did you think Ben Franklin said that he designed a republic as long as we could keep it?
Probably for the same reason that it was a balance between the economic interests represented by the senators and the landowners and the landholders versus the common people who had their interests. And he felt that that counterbalancing effect would keep things properly in order. And the checks and balance systems, the executive has his function, the Supreme Court has its function. So these factors work against each other, and hopefully it'll all work together. That was, I think, his idea.
Okay, so what do you think is the big difference between democracy and a republic?
I think Alondra hit it on the head. It's the democracy is when the people vote, and a republic is when you elect somebody who says, now I think I'll vote for all 60,000 of you who I represent. And I'll use my own mind and my own values. And by the way, give me a little money on the side. And then I'll betray my constituents for money. So that's why I'm not that impressed with the idea of a republic.
The original founding fathers were not interested in women's rights. How can you have democracy when you eliminated about 50% of your population from participating?
Good. Don't ask me. I mean, I completely agree with that. I think a notion of democracy was the males, it's democratic for the males who are the head of households. And women were considered like children. You know, you're not going to give a 3-year-old a right to vote. So why should you give the mother of those 3-year-olds a right? It's the man who is, that's their thinking, I think. I don't think they even thought about giving women the right to vote when they framed the Constitution.
I had a few questions from Kroth. I was curious, for our contemporary society in America, do you think a republic or a democracy is better? Which one is more preferable and why?
I think democracy is more preferable. I think that, it would be really nice to see the people have the right to vote. If their vote, I think I made a list in my book, I don't know if you saw it, of the things that the American people would do if they could do it. They would bring our troops home, okay? They would cut the military budget. They would give expanded rights to women. They would do a lot of very controversial things that they're not allowed to do now. They would help the cities. They would. If you look at the polls, what the majority of Americans believe in, it's not what America is doing.
Right.
We would not be in Iraq. We would not be in Afghanistan right now. Okay, we would not be taxing ourselves so much and building all these rocket ships and establishing these military bases. We would not be doing that. We would bring all that stuff home. And I think democracy deserves a chance.
So to extend that, would you be in favor of doing away with the Electoral College, for example?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of getting rid of the U.S. Senate. I mean, let's face it. You got 2 senators from Rhode Island, and you got 2 senators from California. California's got 39 million people. Rhode Island's got 1.5 million. those two senators who have 1.5 million voters are just as powerful as the two senators from California. That's a republic. That's not democracy.
Right.
I'd get rid of it. But we're getting a little revolutionary here.
So for you, what do you think the relationship is between democracy and the law?
And the law?
The law.
The law. That's a good question. Well, the worst case scenario is the majority of people say people with AIDS should be quarantined in a hospital. There was a period of time when a majority of Californians felt that way. That would be a bad thing because you don't need to quarantine people who have AIDS. We learned that. But in the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic, if the majority ruled, they would have probably put all the HIV positive people in a sanatorium. That's an example of a bad law, don't you think?
Yeah.
So that's the downside of it. That sometimes the majority makes idiotic mistakes based on passion of the moment.
What should the voting age be if we were a democracy?
Anybody who is required to give his life for his country should have a right to vote. If you can't drink by the age of 21, if you can vote, you should be able to drink legally.
What if they oppose 15-year-old citizens should be voting? What if they the citizens said that it was okay?
No. I think you have to say, when is a person come of age? I think that the majority of Americans would say 15 is too young. Should we be able to drive a car when we're 11? Somebody's going to have to make a decision and say that's too. When can a boy buy Playboy magazine? Well, those are all decisions that people who have parental responsibilities say, we're going to set a certain age where you can go and do that and not before. And I think that's important.
Right. So in visualizing this type of society in which, as you said, democracy, a majority rule in certain instances, how a lot of things can be changed, we're talking about that. I'm not familiar with a society, or I can't recall a society in history that's actually had made this possible, where there's been a society with a true democracy. Can you give me some examples of any of those in our history of the world?
Of true democracies?
True democracy, a pure democracy incarnate.
I think that's a hard question. I'm not sure I have one. I have a great deal of respect for Sweden, Denmark, Norway, those countries. But I would really have to go back to my history books to see if I could find a pure participatory democracy. That is, where the laws were all made by the people in some kind of forum rather than by their representatives. So I think we're not going to have very much success finding a genuine participatory democracy in the world.
Right. How do you think that would play a role in, for example, the overturning of laws? So if the majority of people said, okay, let's do away with the 13th Amendment and slavery should be legal again. And how do you think they'll deal with the evolving standards of decency in our country, whereas they may not want old laws to be on the books anymore? With majority of people in democracy to be able to do that, to overturn laws, to directly become legislators if they voted on it, and a referendum sort of aspect.
I think that's one of the most necessary things. We have so many laws that are like that need to be thrown out because they're old, but they're still on the books. And it would be really nice to see the majority say, okay, no more laws against for slavery or excluding people from voting. And I think that's a very necessary thing. I hope I answered that question.
Perfectly.
Do you believe, can a democracy maintain for a long period of time without having changes?
Certainly. The nature of a democracy is flexibility. People change their attitudes. New information comes forward. Gay marriage. 10 years ago, the majority would not have supported gay marriage. Today, the majority of people do support gay marriage. So people change. They change their attitudes. Science adds to our decision-making power. The computer age makes us all smarter. We're more aware of the world now than I think we were in the past. So, yeah, I think democracy is a very good vehicle for adapting to change.
Okay, so going off of that, what do you think excuse me, what role does education play with someone's individual's rights?
It's exactly what your teacher is doing. He's education makes people more aware so that they can vote. Why teach people to get smarter and be more aware of the issues when the Koch brothers are buying votes left and right, and your vote doesn't matter? Your education makes democracy strong. I don't think your education makes the republic strong. Do you know what I'm saying? You are informed voters. Your fellow students are informed voters. When you're 18, you've got very well formed ideas about this or that or this or that, and you deserve a right to have that voice heard.
So I kind of have a dual question of sorts. So first with democracy, obviously, if it's a direct democracy in our country, we found out to be a more preferable society, as you say. The expansion of the electorate would be tremendous. So do you think if we would be a true democracy, we'd have to, in fact, include voters of being an ex-convict or being undocumented immigrants that have been in our country for decades or a substantial amount of time? But those two groups, for example, have to be allowed to vote as well if we were to move to be a direct democracy or a real democracy?
Well, when a person commits a crime, they go to prison. They lose their rights. When they paid for their crime, they should get all their rights back. They shouldn't be free and still not a complete citizen. So I think Rand Paul is a senator for a Republican who's actually in favor of that, and so am I. I think that there are almost 1 million people who are on probation or parole who can't vote. They should be allowed to vote because they served their time. They're back into the citizenry, and they should have all their full rights restored. As far as undocumented people who have been here for a long time, if they've been, let's say you were here when you were 3, and you're still illegal, and you're sitting next to the other guy in high school, I think that person should have rights in the United States. Okay, for some kind of right. I don't know. People will accuse the Democrats of pandering to 14 million illegals by saying we're going to give you all the right to vote. So there has to be some kind of compromise there.
Do you think a majority of Americans would agree with those two groups being able to vote, though, to expand that electorate to ex-convicts and undocumented immigrants?
I don't think so. I think you got a very interesting point. I don't think the majority of Americans would support either.
And just one last question on that aspect. We watched your video on this in preparation for this debate and discussion today. And one of the points you made was that the majority of people believed that, well, of course the video was a few years ago, but the majority of people said that it wouldn't be okay with, or they wouldn't support children of undocumented immigrants going to school. I was curious why you thought that would be true for the majority of Americans today.
I think that data is older. I think that that was based on a poll, I think maybe 5 years ago, which said that an undocumented child should not have the right to go to an American school. Now, the reason they do go to an American school is because the Supreme Court said anyone under the age of 16 in this country must have an education. And that's required regardless of where you're from. So that's basically a Supreme Court ruling, whereas the majority of people 5 years ago did not support that. I think they might support it now. Okay. We have to look at, it would be interesting for us to look at a poll and find out how the average American feels about an undocumented person in an American school. I think they would support their being there. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go now.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
day. Thank you so much for your time.
You're going to be senators, all of you.
That's the goal, Mr. Kroth.
Okay, good. See you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.